Well, welcome everyone. This is David Morgan, as you know, of the Morgan Report. And tonight, it's night here where I am speaking in the Great Northwest. I have a first, and probably known to a lot of you, but probably not my entire audience. This is Michael Yon, a former Green Beret and a war correspondent. And what separates Michael from so many is he's boots on the ground. He goes where I guess others fear to tread, and I guess it's the Green Beret background. You can look up his full bio on the Wikipedia and other places. I don't want to go deep into it because I don't want to waste a minute. Michael and I have been corresponding back and forth on the most imperative thing from my perspective is what's going on longer term with the food crisis, the famine that we're going to see. And Michael has dug into this topic much deeper than I. I'll just give a bit of background for people that have followed me a long time. I was in Mexico on a mining visit, and I got a hold of David Dubine, and I've been following his work for some time, and we started talking about the upcoming food crisis. And if memory serves, that was probably about 7 or 8 years ago. And now David is in China, and he's boots on the ground there reporting rapidly what's going on. But this is not anything to mess with. So, Michael, you can add to your bio. Thank you for taking the time to come on board, especially with short notice. But am I overreacting, or is this one of the most imperative things that we can get to our viewers?
Right. This is it. I've been warning about famine since 2020. Others have warned about it a lot longer. But when it started to become clear to me was 2020. That was actually obviously when the whole COVID thing started. And I was actually in Hong Kong at the time. I got kicked out of Hong Kong they were having the huge protest and that sort of thing. And so that gave I was back in my office in Chiang Mai, Thailand, and had more time to study about some of the other issues that were going on. And that was when I started a sort of great awakening myself. I'd spent years in wars and that sort of thing and doing all kinds of things all over the world. So it was kind of easier for me to start to piece things together retroactively, things that I had seen around the world that I couldn't make sense of. And finally I'm starting to say, I see. I'm starting to see how this plan is working, actually. It's not like there's one plan. There's many different oligarchical systems that are fighting each other. But there are some that are more prevalent than others who have greater, let's say, magnetic fields than others. And so I started to realize that there's actually, this was an evolution of research, actually, that somebody is actually intentionally working to put us into famine. And so that was how we started accurately. Well, that with a lot more research as well. That's how Masako and I, my wife, actually, I'm in our library right now in Japan. That's how Masako and I started to realize. We started going around to places like Netherlands and key places that we thought were key targets for, if you're gonna do a sabotage campaign. There's a philosophy to sabotage, by the way. When I was in special forces, I learned a lot more than just, how to blow up rockets or whatever. There was a lot of detail, actually. We did a lot of training on sabotage, but there's also a philosophy behind it, right? Like, why are you actually doing this? So what's the commander's intent? What are you trying to achieve, right? So because special forces often have a lot more autonomy than normal troops. Normal troops, you'll be assigned a target, and you might not really know why that you were assigned that target, but your job is to prosecute that target, right? And they might say, this is what we need to do, just make sure the bridge is not working anymore, right? But in a special forces scenario, you may have to select your own targets. You may have to grade the targets. You may have to, put a lot of thought into it. And there's one planning tool for that is called a Carver matrix. A Carver matrix is something that was designed maybe in the 1950s, CIA and special, by the way, let's rewind the tapes. The OSS, the Office of Strategic Services in World War II, was doing sort of overlap between what CIA and Special Forces does today. So the OSS, after World War II, was disbanded, and so 2 units came from that, Green Berets and CIA, right? If you want to call CIA a unit. But those are the 2 that, Special Forces was to do more of the military side, but they overlap a lot, right? And CIA was to do more intelligence, but they also do operations and that sort of thing. Anyway, a tool for selecting targets is called the Carver matrix, right? So I was learning how to do this when I was 19, right? And so Carver is criticality, accessibility, recuperability, vulnerability, effect, and recognizability. In other words, you see what the commander's intent is. The commander wants to deny any foreign troops from coming in a certain area for 24 hours. Okay, how do we do what the commander needs? He's told us we've got a little encrypted radio signal that came in. We, have in 72 hours from now, we need to close things down for 24 hours. Okay, how do we do this? We have to select the targets, right? So in any case, when I started to realize that, hey, there's people trying to create famine and they're trying to do it on a global scale, and it's pretty obvious. I mean, they're talking about it. So I started doing Carver matrices, right? And so I did one for Europe, and I thought, I lived in Europe I spent about 7 years in Europe, actually. Ich spreche Deutsch, actually. I speak German. I went to a language school for German when I was in Special Forces. I went to another one for Polish, that sort of thing. So I lived in Poland for 2 years. I lived in Germany for about 4, and I've been all over Europe. So it wasn't hard for me to imagine, when I was in Special Forces in Europe, in Germany, engineers would take us to the dams and say, this is what you need to do, right? Or take us to railway stations. I mean, it was actual engineers. Like, you can destroy our dam, you can destroy our turbines here with like almost nothing. You just have to get access to them for 5 minutes, and this is what you do, right? I'm not going to say what you do, but they would teach us how to do these things. And so I did a Carver matrix for Europe. How if I wanted to destroy Europe, first I would flood them with migrants, quote unquote, which has been a plan for a long time. This has been underway for generations. But if I wanted to destroy the economy, if I wanted to create famine, what would I do? What would I do if I wanted to create famine? So it took a lot of research, right? One thing that I would do is I would attack Germany. Germany would be my primary target, right? And if I were going to attack Germany, you want to pick the targets that are going to do the most bang for the buck, right? I would go for BASF, the BASF chemical plant at Ludwigshafen, Germany. Misako and I then went over there several times. We toured the facility, and 14 days before we toured it, we were inside the facility, and I asked the guy giving us the tour, this is 10 square kilometers. You don't need Google Earth. You can practically see it from wherever you're standing. It's 10 square kilometers. It's a huge plant on the Rhine River. And so I asked him, what happens if Nord Stream gets interrupted, right? Because I thought they're going to take out Nord Stream for various reasons, because Nord Stream is important for the creation, or let's say natural gas is important for the creation of nitrogenous fertilizers, right? Using what's called the Haber-Bosch process, right? Haber-Bosch process, you take you take the hydrogen from the natural gas and combine it with the nitrogen that we're breathing, and you have ammonia, right? And the German chemist Fritz Haber was working on that for years, because there was a guano war and all this other stuff. So anyway, fertilizer is one of the, and food supply, let's say, is one of the, that's basically one of the main weapons in war is food. And an army that has great and good food is automatically, that's like a weapon system. So in any case, that's why the Germans were really pushing, trying to figure out ways to make their own fertilizer. So anyway, Fritz Haber in 1903 in his thermodynamics book, he kind of laid it out how he could do this. And then by about 1907 or 1908, I think he actually made a little bit. It was hard to make. It was actually hard to pull it off, but he did. That's when Bosch came in, Karl Bosch, another German chemist. And because Fritz Haber, he got the theory right, and he made a little bit of ammonia, but out of natural gas. But then it was kind of hard to do it on an industrial scale. So that's when the tag team in. Bosch comes in, Karl Bosch, and he says, this is how we'll make a factory. So anyway, 1913, 1914, right when the Panama Canal is opening, by the way, is when BASF started making nitrogenous fertilizers, right? So that Haber-Bosch process is now used around the world. And in any case, what would I do? If I wanted to cause famines and cause massive economic destruction, obviously I would cut off energy of all forms, but in particular, I would cut Nord Stream, and I would cut Groningen gas field. I would cut Groningen gas field, which is the biggest gas field in Europe. It's in Netherlands. So we went over there. We were just over there again just a few months ago in Groningen. And I was on with Jordan Peterson, I think maybe with Ava Vlardingerbrook, and I said, I think Ava totally agreed because she had already looked into this herself. That I think they're going to close Groningen gas field. Now, a lot of people are saying they'll never close Groningen gas field. It's the biggest gas field in Europe, and I'm like, hello, that's that exactly. That's why I think that they'll close it, right? So anyway, Misako and I had been at, jumping back to Germany from Netherlands. We had been in the BASF plant 14 days before Nord Stream was blown up. In fact, I had an extra iPad that I had bought. This is it, actually. That I just kept the. There was a website. Yeah, I could see how many cubic meters per second were flowing through Nord Stream 1 and 2, right? And you could see it kind of varied a little bit. It kind of go up and down. And for months, I just watched that thing. And at one point, I was like, hey, Misako, check it out. Nord Stream has gone to zero. Now, we had just been in BASF 14 days before that. And we were in Germany or Netherlands or somewhere, and everything went to zero. And I rebooted everything, and I said, wow. I started calling around. I said, did something happen to Nord Stream? Yep, sure was. You could see it bubbling up on television, right? And so, that's the rare occasions when I'll like turn on a television. So you could see it was there. It was. I said, wow, they did it. I didn't expect they would blow it up. I thought they would do it some other way. But anyway, that's what they decided to do. And then Groningen, they closed Groningen too. So they did both of them, bang, bang. And then you can see all the fertilizer production facilities burning down all over the place. Cattle farm. We successfully predicted screwworms outbreak coming back to the United States, and they are now. We predicted that like 4 or 5 years ago in writing. All these things I'm talking about, if you did an AI search, and you could see that I warned about Nord Stream and screwworms and Groningen and I don't know, hundreds of times, right? Famine, thousands of times, right? And fertilizer, all these sorts of things. But what I'm getting to is, how are we doing this? It's not because we're genius or anything like that. It's just because we pay attention to what they're saying. We pay attention to what they're doing. And then I just use some of my old, training that I got from the Army. I'm very thankful that I was in Special Forces. It's been, boy, has that ever been a fruitful education in light of what's going on in the last 20 years. And so so what I'm getting to is with that knowledge set, it's kind of obvious. It's not like a huge math problem at that point. It's kind of almost like a very tiny algebra problem at that point that a sixth grader can do. And so, if you wanted to create famine, then what would you do? Well, I would close Strait of Hormuz. I would do that, right? I would close the Turkish Strait. I would close the Strait of Gibraltar. I would close the Danish Strait. We were just up there, actually. I would close Panama Canal. I would close Strait of Malacca. I would destroy all that energy infrastructure that's being destroyed now. I would destroy all of it, right? If I wanted to create famine and do a population reduction, if your in-state goal is this is a complete remake of Earth. We're not just making a crisis to solve killing billions of people. They're doing exactly what I would do. That's why you see what's happening in the Middle East now. Look at anything that I've written in the years about this. Just throw a dart. Pick 20 things, throw darts, and see how it's turning out now. And it's not genius. It's just paying attention to what they're saying. For instance, about 3 days ago, I said, you know what? I expect at any point something will happen in Panama, right? And I spent about a year in Panama. Misako and I, we took Brett Weinstein and 60 or 70 people down. Brett just messaged this morning. That's why he's on my mind. But we took congressmen down there. We took so many people. We took Chris Martinson to the Darien Gap and through the Panama Canal. Because, I was saying, we're going to probably end up with famines. And then the Darien Gap will be a major invasion route, right? And furthermore, somebody's going to try to take this canal. This canal is this important to the United States, right? And it's absolutely vital to us, right? We opened it in 1914. In any case, so just about 3 days ago, with Hormuz going as I said it would, that it would probably be closed, but Iran has no reason to close it. How many times have I written this? 100? I don't know. Before the war, by the way, which we successfully predicted the date of the attack. I was publishing well in advance that I thought the attack would happen between 22nd of February, 2026, and the 3rd of March. It happened on 28th of February. I was publishing that in writing. I think that, and just last week on April 2nd, I said, I think something will happen like right now today on a ground invasion type thing. Boom. And then the whole F-15 stuff breaks, whatever is really happening there. It's obviously not about a downed aircraft. I did a lot of missions with those Air Force Pedro guys in Afghanistan. There is no way that was all done for a couple airmen. Anyway, not to go into that. But what I'm getting to is, how are we predicting all this stuff? We are predicting it based on basically what would I do, right? That's red teaming it. It's called, just doing the red team. And I think, anyway, so like 3 days ago, I said, I think that you're going to see something at Panama Canal. And then boom, there's a big fire right under the canal. You probably saw the videos, right under the Thatcher Ferry Bridge, which is called the Bridge of the Americas. It's Highway 1, right? I've been across that bridge so many times. I took Brett across it. I took those congressmen right there, right? I was like, they could take out this bridge and drop it in the canal, right? And they could do all kinds of stuff. But putting tanker trucks under a bridge, and somehow they went on fire. Now, it could have been an accident. It could have been, let's say. But remember, accidents is one of the camouflages of a covert sabotage campaign, right? Is just incompetence or accidents. But in any case, I asked one of my investigator partners yesterday or 2 days ago to map out all the places in the last recent years where tanker trucks have burned up under bridges. For instance, I recall one that was, 4 or 5 years ago, dropped a major bridge in the United States. But that's a technique that I learned in the Army. It was to set a fire under the bridge. And so that bridge is now out of action in Panama, which is that was the first bridge that opened in 1962. They called it the Thatcher Ferry Bridge then. Now they call it the Bridge of the Americas. But and it angers a lot of the Zonians who live there. Hey, we still call it the Thatcher Ferry Bridge. When they called it the Bridge of the Americas, they were very angry because that was a globalist move to rename it, right? Anyway, so that was the first bridge. The Chinese are opening the fourth bridge now right beside it, which I've published many, many times. Like I have people send me photos of it every week. And of course, I spend a lot of time there myself. But what I'm getting to is, I think that was, by the way, there's 3 categories of sabotage, right? One is called overt. The other is covert. And number 3 is clandestine, right? And it's important. The difference is overt is when, you let's say burn something down and you claim it. You're like, yeah, we did it because we're the Earth Liberation Front or something. And we don't want you building houses in these forests, right? So they actually claim it and they say why they're doing it often, right? So that's called overt. Everybody sees that it happened. There was a fire and that group claimed it. If that's the actual group that did it, maybe they could have been blamed, in which case that would be covert. But in any case, but if it's overt, you do it, everybody sees it, smoke, fire, explosion, whatever. That's called overt. Covert is when you can see that it happened, which is what I think just happened in Panama. It was probably a covert sabotage where everybody can see there was a huge fire, and it is quite mysterious, the location. And but it's blamed on incompetence or an accident, that sort of thing, or it gets blamed on somebody else. So that's called covert action, right? Nobody knows who did it. Clandestine is a third category, and that's wherein nobody actually realizes that an operation even occurred. You might not even know anything happened. Somebody could have broken into a computer and stole a major database, right? And there's nobody even knows that it was stolen, right? And so you don't know who did it. You don't even know that it happened. That's called clandestine. And clandestine happens a lot, right? And there's clandestine, for instance, with the attack with the Stuxnet. I read a book on Stuxnet. Stuxnet was the very detailed software that was written to insert into the Iranian centrifuges, right? The centrifuges were made in Germany and that sort of thing. Anyway, and the turbines apparently were getting out of sync and running too fast. And anyway, they kind of messed them up. And the Iranians are like, what's wrong with our centrifuges, right? In any case, according to the book, the book itself could be an information but I mean, but I mean, because that's how this stuff goes, information war is the highest form of warfare. Everything is subordinate to that. But in any case, those are the three types: overt, covert, clandestine. What we have going on in the Middle East right now, I think almost every analyst I see talking about it is getting it wrong, because they're talking about, Trump's decision, Trump's decision. Trump could be gone tomorrow and he's irrelevant. That guy's a leaf on a tree. He's not part of the game, right? He's a condom. He's a property, right? And likewise with Bibi, he'll just be gone. And this will continue because the architecture, the organizational structure has been in place since before we were born, right? It's been active. This is not a new war. This is how we're able to predict it so well. This is all we do is this library. This is our library. It took years to make it. It's huge, actually, and it's a war library. And there's no books on guns here. There's no books on submarines. There's practically nothing on kinetics here other than incidental. It's all about anthropological warfare, routes and resources, currency, gold, silver. Information war is huge. Intoxicants in warfare, alcohol, cannabis, opium, all these different things. It's all about those sorts of things. It's the higher level warfare. When you look at, Green Beret stuff and Navy SEAL stuff and Delta Force stuff, it makes really cool movies. But that's like the plumber level of warfare. That's like hey, we got a leak, we need a plumber. Bring in the Delta Force plumber. He's the best guy in the world. But and they're unbelievable. They're really, really good at that sort of plumbing. They make holes in things and blood squirts out, or they capture people, right? They're extremely good at it. But it's a tiny part of war. And they know that. You talk with the serious Delta or SF guys, they're all like, actually, we're just basically athletes with a plan. It's like, it's just like a rod and gun club for athletes. You know what I mean? Your job is to be a very good athlete and know how to do stuff, but not know how to run the war or even what the grand strategy is. The grand strategy is, we're predicting things because we understand the grand strategy. Most people talking they're the talking heads. They're talking about strategy, which is a very low level if you're trying to be predictive of what's unfolding. So the idea, for instance, I think we're going to end up seeing sooner or later, something's going to happen at Malacca. You just saw apparent strike by the Israelis or somebody on the Chinese railway, by the way, BRI railway coming from China to I've been to the Shanghai side of that, by the way. I've been in China and I've been to the Rotterdam side. That railway goes all the way across. And I was just down in Thailand looking how they're building it there. But I mean, so this is about every war you've ever studied is about one, two, or three of these things: routes, resources, and ideology. It's about either one of those things, two of those things, or three of those things. In this case, big time, high relief, three things: routes, resources, and ideology. There's many ideologies battling. There's huge fights going on for routes and resources. Remember, our country, the United States, is a product of globalism, right? I'm American to the core. Despite the things that I know, somehow it's like burned into me. It's like, and so I'm deeply American, despite that I realize a lot of things now I didn't know when I was in special forces, right? But somehow I'm still American to the core. But when you look at some of the things that are happening, these synthetic countries, I call them the Panama synthetic. We created Panama on November 3rd, 1903, so that we could make the Panama Canal, which opened in 1914, right? We created, or let's say the British, with their crayons, apparently drawing maps, Percy Cox, drawing the lines. I call them the 1922 synthetic countries, which I spent a lot of time in. The GCC countries like Kuwait, right, Saudi Arabia, Oman, and all that, UAE, and Qatar, right, and Bahrain. So so those are synthetic countries. And then there's the 1948 synthetic country. That's Israel. That was also created for routes and resources. That was all part of the same architecture. You can't look at Israel separately and go, oh, it's for a homeland for the Jews. Nope. Total psyop. That was for the Suez Canal and other routes. Israel happens to be on an incredibly important location, 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 just like Panama is. Even without the canal, Panama would be important. Even without the Suez Canal, Israel would be important because of location, location, location. Those Gulf countries became very important. Well, they were very important before the discovery of oil, but they became really important with the later discovery and dependence on that energy, not just the oil, but the natural gas and that sort of thing. So in any case, when you're doing a depopulation move, you're just going to take this stuff down to the point where, like just months ago in Germany, they blew up a nuclear power plant down in Bavaria. They invited the public. They were out there celebrating, blowing up the cooling towers, and they did it. 3, 2, 1. It was like, it was like a drei, zwei, null. It goes, there it goes. And so they did it. And so they've done that the same with coal-fired plants. They're removing water infrastructure around Europe. They're removing all kinds of infrastructure in subtle ways that people don't know about. Like a Norwegian yesterday contacted me about water infrastructure. And one of the things that's happening in Netherlands, actually a Dutch guy today contacted me about that. I've already researched this. I know what they're saying is actually true, but the water infrastructure is not being maintained. Like it's silting up in those rivers in the canals in Europe, right? It's just silting up. Anyway, so what I'm getting to is I think you may see the three.
Can I pause you here for just a moment?
Yep. Yes, sir. I'll be quiet. Actually, I've been rambling on.
No, you're doing an excellent job. So I want to get to some specifics. I'm going to give you 2 questions and let you continue because you're doing great. But if you go to the Deagle report, I think it was 2025 or 2026, and I don't remember the exact number, but I think something like half of the U.S. population will be gone by year end 2026 or thereabouts.
I think they said 46% or something, right? Okay. Something like that.
So what I want numbers if you have them. Wild ass guesses if that's what they are, but doing your research, I doubt you have it. And also talking way back with David Dubine, he hit me with something. I had to ask him twice to repeat it because what he told me was in a normal past history, famines, food prices increased a factor of 7-fold. So you could be in Thailand and just making a living, and there might be food available at a price, but the price is so high you can't buy it anyway. So I'd like you to factor those 2 things in. How bad is it potentially from what you know so far? And am I right, or is David right about, money can't solve the problem in many instances if you're just living paycheck to paycheck?
That's a problem. Often famines David just messaged me yesterday. He was talking about food prices. Actually, I didn't talk with him yesterday because he left a voicemail, but we talked last week about this, and David's been dead on, right? And so and he understands the more of the intricacies, which is very important. So it's good to listen to him. But in any case, food. You can go into famine for various reasons. One of the, when I first started warning about famine in the United States in 2020, people were like, don't you understand the United States is the #1 food exporter in the world? I'm like, trust me, before I talk into that microphone, I will have done my homework, right? Yeah, I completely understand that. I'm very cautious with my words. But when you study famine, which I have, PANFA, pandemic, famine, war, they go together. If you get a big pandemic, a real big pandemic, you'll get famine and you'll get war, right? If you get a big famine, you'll get war and you'll get pandemic, right? You'll get all these things like typhus and famine go together. And that's why I've been saying so loud all the time, I think we're going to have a typhus problem at some point. I've said that for years now, and now it is starting to break out now, actually. I actually track typhus. I have for years. But in any case, what I'm getting to is there are certain things that do work together. And when you understand, these things, it's very helpful in prediction. Now, when it comes to famine, one of the worst famines that you can easily read about, Holodomor, happened in Ukraine. Ukraine's a food basket of the world. Where's my Ukraine candle? I had one painted because I'm going to burn it when Ukraine burns down. But let me show you this candle. I had this Ukraine candle painted. I have a big one here, actually, somewhere. The gold down here is, before the first shot was fired in Ukraine, I was like, don't do it. They're destroying Ukraine. publishing it. But the gold is for the wheat and the blue is for the sky. Ukraine is a huge breadbasket. Also, they produce a lot of fertilizer, which goes down through the Black Sea, through the Turkish Straits. And Russia does too. That's why I've been warning. I think they're going to close the Turkish Straits. And in fact, a big Russian facility just got hit in the Black Sea the other day. Anyway, not to go into that. But famine. Being in a place with a lot of food like Henan province, China, that's where some of the worst famine was. Or Ireland in the 1840s and 50s. Ireland's a big food producer, right? And yet because that was a man-made, that was a synthetic famine. It was man-made, right?
Yep.
And I've read quite a bit about it. We went to Ireland researching it actually, and so. But in any case, in fact, at one point I was in Ireland researching it, and I messaged. I think we had gone over to London at this point later after Ireland, and I messaged over to the old Prime Minister of Thailand, a friend of mine. His name is Mark Abhisit. He was a prime minister. I wrote the last 2 pages in his book. It's called The Simple Truth. I wrote them in English. And so I messaged him and I said, hey, I'm in, I don't know, London or someplace, and I'd like to fly over to Bangkok and talk with you about food problems. So that was like 4 or 5 years ago. I published about this. And so I flew over there and I said, you know what, I think you got to keep an eye on Strait of Hormuz and Strait of Malacca. That obviously, but in particular the Turkish Straits and the Strait of Hormuz, because And he goes, you've been all over Thailand. We don't have any food problem. I'm like, yeah, I was just in Ireland, and that's what everybody there tells me too, right?
Yeah.
But when you really do the balance sheet, there's a lot of inputs that go into that food coming out of the ground, like nitrogenous fertilizers, Haber-Bosch process, right? And so a lot of that is dependent on natural gas or somebody else making the fertilizer. So I said, I have been all over Thailand. I've been in every province of Thailand, right? Why am I in Thailand so much? Because Thailand is the hyphen in Indo-Pacific security, right? People, when I went to Thailand, they're like, oh, you're there to go to the bars and chase girls. I'm like, you clown. I just left years of combat in Iraq and Afghanistan. You think I'm here for that? I'm here because this is a future war front, right? If I'm in Texas, when I moved to Texas, people are like, you're in Texas. That's great. We're not going to be, nothing's going to happen here. So many people said that. I'm like, well, if I move in your neighborhood, you should probably be selling your house, right? If I'm showing up, I'm like death knocking on the door, right? I flew back to Thailand and I said, no, I think sooner or later. And he said, Mark Habisit, former prime minister, he just ran again. Actually, he didn't make it a few months ago. But I said, if these things are shut down, then, the huge exporter of rice here and other food products, Thailand, which I'm intimately familiar with Thailand from north to south, east to west, right? You only create 8% of your nitrogenous fertilizers. You import 92%. I didn't just fly in from Europe without knowing what I'm talking about, right? And I'm just saying, I'm not saying that you have to do anything. I'm just saying that have it in the back of your mind that if these places were to become closed, like Strait of Hormuz, Turkish Strait, that sort of thing, it can be intentional, which I think was beyond his, that was putting him into cognitive dissonance. So I kind of changed the subject a little bit. I said, Pakistan, India, Bangladesh, they can all go into famine and they'll come straight to Thailand, right? And he said, no, they'll stop them in Myanmar. I'm like, you know what? I have been over to India and I took the route through Bangladesh, through Myanmar, and it's a straight shot right to Thailand. Nobody's going to stop them. That's not how famines work. If they have famine in India, they're going to come right through the chicken neck. They're going to go right over there through Bangladesh, and the Bangladeshis will be here too. They're going to, what I'm getting to is you need to have a plan to deliver food over there, so some of it at least, so they don't show up here. Because one of the things that happens in famines is people rob the farmers. One of the people that robs the farmers is the governments. But anyway, then the farmers stop producing. But if you don't have enough nitrogenous fertilizers, you're not going to be making all that rice, because rice is basically a nitrogen vacuum. Rice is very nitrogen intensive, right? And so you're just not going to have it. And that's going to affect here in Japan. That's why I've been warning the Japanese people a lot for years. I've been very clear. If the Strait of Hormuz closes, you better really make sure you're stocked up on everything that you need, right?
Michael, have you mapped out what the timeline would look like? Like, with so many ships not going through, that you've got a math formula or an idea of it's a 2-year thing. I'm talking to, again, David Dubine, the foodstuffs that are in storage is, as far as I could tell, depleted in a lot of areas and not much in others. Have you looked at it from the aspect of worst case, best case, what the range is in months, years, weeks, whatever it is?
Timing is one of the hardest things to work out.
I know it is. I know I'm asking a hard question, but
because you're in the metals business, you live that.
Best case.
I watched a lot of your videos, so I mean, you know how hard timing is. You're like, silver is basically a good investment, but what's it going to be tomorrow? I got no idea. So it's the same with this. Now, as a general trend, I think that by the end of 2027, it's going to present itself in full relief for even the most basic people will clearly see it hitting them over the head. Because right now we're eating a lot of the food that was created last year, and there is a lot of fertilizer still in the pipeline, or still the nitrogen still in the soil, but every minute some of that nitrogen and other nutrients, phosphates and all the potassium, these things are being consumed by the plants and us, and they're going out to the sea. And so certainly by sometime in 2027, I think we're going to have serious problems. Now, keep in mind, Strait of Hormuz is not actually closed. That's very important to bear in mind. Yeah. But the people that really want to close it, that would be the Israel, United States gangsters, right? That would be us, unfortunately, right? We're the one. That's why the Kurds apparently attacked a ship about 2 weeks ago near the Turkish Straits, right? And apparently they used drones, and they didn't close the strait. But I thought that was interesting. I spent a lot of time with Kurds. You got to keep in mind, a lot of the Kurds work that close with the Israelis, right? Mm-hmm. A lot of the Kurds are actually Zionist. I know they're Sunni Muslim, but a lot of the Kurds are actually Zionist. And so I spent a lot of time with them, and a lot of them are extremely pro-Israel. Although that's taken a hit more recent times because of some things that have been happening over in Syria and whatnot. But but what I'm getting to is they also have overlap on enemies. Like a lot of the Kurds definitely want their homeland, obviously, and they want to take it from Turkey, and obviously the Israelis want to go full bore against the Turks. And so anyway, if closing down a lot of things can accelerate it, and the people that want to accelerate it is unfortunately our side, right? They're the ones that actually, like, the Russians don't want to make a famine. That's clear. The Chinese obviously don't want to make a famine. I'm not seeing any indication that the Chinese want to make a famine now, even though they've used famine and war quite a lot. I don't see any evidence that the Chinese are actually behind what's going on. It clearly looks like U.S. Israel, right? Like very, very crystal clearly, right? I mean, who blew up Nord Stream? Even when I still ask Germans who blew up Nord Stream, a lot of them are like, well, Russians, or maybe that Ukrainian guy got arrested or whatever. I'm like, listen, there's two possibilities who blew up Nord Stream, only two that I can see, and that would be United States or space aliens, right? That's it. I don't know. It could have been space aliens, but it's either us or them, right? And you can obviously conflate United States and Israel together because it's so commingled that it's like salt water. You can't tell it apart, right? But famines, there's a lot of things that can create famines. Look at Weimar Germany, hyperinflation. Here's the basic of how those sorts of famines can unfold. So, because sometimes it's an honest food shortage, like a volcano. There's been a huge amount of famines here in Germany, in Japan. There's been a huge amount of famines here, right? Masako, my wife, found evidence of 503 famines in 1,500 years, right? It's not like all of Japan's in a famine, but you'll have like some island, or you can see Mount Fuji from where we're at, right? So, no trees. That thing could go at any moment, and volcanoes create a lot of famines, or locusts, or droughts, or whatever, right? And often it's man-made due to war, but those tend to be local, right? So that can be an actual food shortage caused by just Mother Nature or your neighbor doing it. But then comes like hyperinflation, like in Weimar Germany, right? So they had hyperinflation. People couldn't afford the food, right? So they start stealing it. They start stealing from. It's funny. About 5 years ago, I was publishing. One of the ways that famine can be worse in the second season is in the first season, people can't afford it. So they start stealing they start gleaning, let's say, like hyper gleaning from the farmers and from the avocado tree of their neighbor or whatever. And then they just take it, right? First of all, it's worth a lot more money now too, right? And it's interesting because one of my readers said, I woke up and every avocado was taken off of my tree. All of them were gone. That's why I mentioned avocado, because she mentioned that. She goes, I'm thinking about chopping down the tree, because she was so angry. I said, don't chop it down. And you're actually, what you just said, I have actually read in books before, right? There's like in old books about famines. People come and rob the farmers, and the farmer burns down his own equipment so people can't steal it from him. He'd rather, which contributes to the famine itself, right? And so, but what I'm getting to is when people start stealing from stores, stealing from warehouses, stealing from the trains and the boats and the trucks, and directly from the fields, then it stops flowing and stops being creative. So that second season can be really severe, right? Because the first season, it was still there. Not everybody could afford it. They started stealing, so it stopped flowing, right? And now keep in mind, there's different sorts of famines. I just noticed this by reading a couple dozen books on famines. The one sort is just sort of a quick famine. It just starts like we were, and then the volcano came, or locusts showed up, that sort of thing. And so next thing you know, or war starts, right? Like the hunger winter in Netherlands in 1944, right? And so in 1944, 45, right? It was a very cold winter, and then the Germans were interrupting some of the food, that sort of thing. And so that was a quick famine. It actually started quickly and ended quickly. We were parachuting in food to them and that sort of thing. And it started, people did die from it. They actually starved to death, that sort of thing. It's interesting because one Dutch guy, I read this, his words, he said, it doesn't matter if you have a rifle. If you have food and people know about it, they will get that food. It doesn't matter if you have a gun, because they're going to show up with more guns and they're going to get your food. And that's why people, like, one of the reasons that the Soviet intelligence grew up at the time that it did in a big way was actually Stalin looking for food, right? And Mao was doing the same thing, because people would hide it. They would hide it everywhere. And so anyway, what I'm getting to is that there's the quick famines that kind of just snap and there they go. And then there's the slow ones that you just fade into, which is what we're doing now. These tend to be the worst ones. The worst ones, you kind of fade into it. And like right now, we're fading into it. It's slow and it's almost imperceptible. There are certain things that you can notice that happen when you fade into these, that I just noticed by reading books, actually. And one is that people start wandering around a lot more. They're like, in other words, they're just like, more people on the streets. They don't have anything to eat. And interestingly, and they're a lot of people start carrying spoons, actually. And which is interesting, because when I was in the Army, pretty much every Green Beret I knew always had a spoon in his pocket, which is interesting, because later when I'm studying famines, I started messaging to some of them, all those spoons we used to carry. There's actually a famous photo from Netherlands of a boy holding up a spoon. People always have those spoons when there's a famine. But in any case, the people start wandering around, but many people in famine actually die at home. Actually, they actually end up dying in their own home. So it's fascinating. But remember, pandemic, famine, war, they all create something called HOP, human osmotic pressure. And the human osmotic pressure is the push and pull of migration, right? And that's why I spent so much time in Darien and successfully predicted that would become a major invasion route. When Misako and I first went down there with Chuck Holton, we were down there, and I said, you know what? I think this is right then it was just a trickle. Very few people were coming through. And I said, you know what? I think they're going to start coming through here. So I started spending months alone down there by myself. I mean, Misako was back in Japan. I'm out in the jungle with the Indians, right? And I'm like, mapping it out and figuring this thing out. And I'm like, they're going to do this. I think that they're going to do this because there's certain clues and like this stuff, and but it took a lot of study. And at some point, I'm like, yeah, this is it. So they're prepping this for famine, is what I think that they were doing, and I was publishing that like several years ago. I think they're prepping places like Darien Gap so that when famines actually happen in South America and Africa and other places, Camp of the Saints style, people are gonna. That's a book which I have. It's very hard to find, but but Camp of they're just gonna come in by the tens of millions, right? So the people that are already here now, keep in mind, so the ant trails have already been created, like the United Nations and HIAS, the Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society, Catholic Charities, Lutheran Services, Red Cross, IOM, these people, International Organization for Migration, all these hundreds of these people. We've mapped out a lot of them, but these NGOs will be the ones, they've already created the stigmergic pathways for these people to get here. When Masako and I flew through Turkey just, I don't know, a few weeks ago on the way to Thailand again, and then here back to Japan, we were in Istanbul, and there were a lot of migrants they always have those IOM, or often have those IOM bags, IOM. It'll be a blue bag with white writing or a white bag with blue writing, and it'll either say IOM or OIM, depending on the language, right? So sometimes it's IOM, sometimes OIM. So anyway, there they are with the IOM bags, and I made video. They were boarding it. This is in Istanbul, just weeks ago. They were boarding an airplane to Vancouver, Canada, right? And the IOM ladies were there with their blue. They had their blue vest on and that sort of thing. And so, all these pipelines are wide open. They're still wide open to the United States. A lot of people say, "No, don't you understand? Trump shut the border." I'm like, brother, I've been across every inch of that southern border. I've been from SpaceX. I spent a lot of time in SpaceX, all the way to San Diego. It took months, right? Not every inch, obviously, that would take years, but I was all over that border, all the way across. And then a lot of that was on the Mexican side. I know that border. I spent a lot of time up on the Canadian border, down in southern Mexico, also in Guatemala and Belize and El Salvador and Honduras, looking at all these places. Panama, a year in Panama looking at this. We were down in Colombia looking at it, Argentina, Morocco, all over Europe, all over Asia. I mean, we know this subject. I mean, when I talk with Border Patrol people, I'm like, most of those guys don't really know what's going on. The very few people that do know what's going on in Border Patrol tend to really know what's going on. Like that, like there's like that few percentage in Border Patrol that really study hard. Most of the Border Patrol are like, I'll ask them like, how are these people getting to the border that you're loading onto the bus tonight on my video? It's like, they're like Mexican cartels. And I'm like, well, they're coming from Bangladesh. I mean,
Yeah, right.
And I'm like, and actually you're loading them on the bus. Are you in the Mexican cartel? No, obviously, right? No, it's not the Mexican cartels. The Mexican cartels are just one little way stop. They make money at that last 100-yard line, right? And the last mile problem, that's the Mexican cartels, or let's say the last country problem, right? They make a lot of money on that last stop. I've been down to all over the place looking at this in Mexico. But it's not the Mexican cartels. It's transnational. It's huge, right? And Border Patrol is a component of it. A lot of people in Border Patrol follow my work, and I would show up and they're like, oh yeah, and they'd want to talk all night. I mean, because they are tracking and they wanted information from me. I'm flowing it out as fast as I can and trying to get back from them. And, we're swapping email addresses and that sort of thing so that we can make this information flow. But we do understand. And what I'm getting to is we are being invaded by our own country. Trump is not there to stop the Border Patrol. He's there to make a lot of money throwing that fence up. And it's a tremendous fence, by the way. And the border wall is quite serious, but it's, left unguarded. And they're not doing mass deportations. ICE is not doing that, right? I think what's going to happen with the U.S. draft is the following, and I've published this many times over the years. Draft, kill off the patriots, up to 42. They're talking about, I hope they'll take Shapiro. Go off, be a Marine, Shapiro. And well, they won't take him in the Marines, but anyway, try if you want. But but go off and I think they'll kill off our patriots, and then they'll put these people that we saw coming across the border into the military. This is an old game. There's nothing new about this. I mean, the things I'm talking about are old. So they'll draft a foreign army to genocide Americans. This is an old game, and it's a tale as old as time. And so, again, what do special forces do? Why was the unit that I was in, Green Berets, even formed in the 1950s? It was formed to raise foreign armies. That's why it was formed. So you see the motto of special forces is Deo Presso Libere, to free the oppressed, right? Which at the time I thought that's what it was all about.
Sure.
As I get older and study a lot more, I'm like, these things don't add up. And so I was what most of the Border Patrol are now. I was a gear in a clock, and I didn't know what time it was. In fact, I didn't even know I was a gear in a clock. I thought I was a serious special forces soldier, which I was. But I was a gear in somebody else's clock, and I didn't know what that clock even did. I didn't know what factory it hung in, or what that factory produced, or what I was just a small little widget there. And that's the way even the top generals in the military are that, right? They are gears in the clock, and some know what time it is, and they still do it, and some don't, and they resign, and some know what it is and have resigned, right? We're Smedley Butler when we need him,
Yeah,
Actually,
exactly.
I was with that's a great book, man. War's a Racket. Somebody told me that. It was actually a left-wing guy told me to read it years ago. When the endorsement came from him, I was like, that's probably not worth reading. But then finally I read it, and I was like, I should have read that years ago.
How about Admiral Stockdale's In Love and War? That's another one.
Yeah, I mean, this is like the things that you start to realize. Oh man, we got to come on and talk again for hours because there's a lot to talk about.
Well, let
And
me
I'll
wrap it
ramble on
up
too
here. Two things. One, where do you see it a year or year and a half out? Do you think that anybody that's able to fog a mirror, and I'm not trying to put anyone down, I'm just saying anyone that might be still sleepy, which is hard to be in today's environment, knows there's a food situation worldwide, there'll be a die off of noticeable numbers? Or do you think we'll just have to be living off the last of the food stores and people are just starting to find out?
I think the famines are going to be severe. And I think you're going to see, this is my guess based on, by the way, the things that I'm predicting, I absolutely do not want to happen. Often people, when you predict something, they go, "Why do you want that to happen?" I'm like, no, non sequitur. It's the opposite.
Trying to help you.
I'm trying to interrupt it, right? Yeah, and again, like when Newt Gingrich called me up over 10 years ago trying to get support for Trump, I was like, nope, I'm never going to vote for something called Clinton. I'm never going to support an Obama or a Clinton or later, that Kamala thing or that Biden. But they're all part of the same game, and then, of course, people get caught in that. Well, it's the lesser of the evils. It's like, actually, no, it's not. And so, but
evil is evil. Period.
That's right. Infinite evil is just infinitely evil. And so, what I'm getting to is, where do I think it'll go? I think, clearly some form of civil war. And it'll be difficult to predict because it's, I've been all over the United States. I've seen the United States in great detail, right? Like I went to school in California twice. I grew up in Florida. I lived in North Carolina, had a business in North Carolina, had a business in Ohio. I've lived in, oh, good Lord, I've been Texas, you know what I mean? I've been all over Massachusetts. I lived in Massachusetts twice, right? I've been in all the states except Alaska. And most of the states I've been to, like, I don't know, a lot, you know what I mean? Not just passing through, And so what I'm getting to with that is, I'm somewhat familiar with the United States, more than most Americans are actually, because I travel a lot. It's just what I love to do. And I love to talk with people. For some reason, despite the things I know, I still like people. I don't even know why. Maybe it's just part of my firmware or something. I don't know why, but, because I know there's a lot of great people out there and they're worth fighting for. But what I'm getting to is I've seen the United States. It's a very textured country. It's very, it's easy to put. If I look at this through the lens of a special forces soldier, I look at my country. I'm like, this is an easy country to put into civil war. Now it may take time. It'll take obvious pressure. What would I do? I would do what Paul Harvey said. What did Paul Harvey say that in 1963? If I were the devil, and not only Paul Harvey, but G. Edward Griffin, man, I called him up. Sometimes I just call him up. G. Edward Griffin, creature from Jekyll Island. That guy's brilliant. I mean, you look at the things that G. Edward Griffin would say and Paul Harvey, the people they thought were old fogies. Those guys are dead on, man. I told G. Edward Griffin the last time I talked with him, I said, you know what? Everything you predicted that I've seen has turned out to be true. The only thing you missed was all these drones, right? And of course, nobody could have predicted that crap, or maybe somebody could. But anyway, but I mean, you look at all of Ronald Reagan's old black and white speeches. Like I've binged on those old speeches, just looking at them going, who is this guy? Because I liked Ronald Reagan, but maybe he's just a great actor. You know what I mean? Maybe, you know what I mean? Because it could have been that, because he was an actor. So that makes me, that has to put up a red flag. But then I look at a lot of his black and white videos, man, he was accurate. I mean, he was the things that Reagan was saying back when it was, dinosaur days and black and white. That man's turned out to be accurate, like G. Edward Griffin, like Paul Harvey. If I were the devil, I'd basically get everybody on drugs and alcohol, and and doing all this foolishness and weaken our general population. And that would be the number one thing, is the information war, because the highest level of warfare is information war. I'd have people
cognitive map, the way you think, what you believe, what you're taught to believe, how we're indoctrinated, and how we're taught from the beginning to submit to authority. I think the best thing we can teach our kids is to question everything and question authority as well. I'm going to have to wrap it up here pretty soon, but
let's go for another 2 hours.
But let's reconvene and do another one. And a finer point on all that you've conveyed tonight, and thank you again for your time and taking this on, on short notice. There are states, Oregon being one, where you cannot even grow your own food. If that doesn't give you a red flashing light that the master plan is to make sure that Americans are less and less self-sufficient, I don't know what does. I mean, I know, like in my place here, when I moved here, the remnants of Mount St. Helens were still over on this far side of the state. So we still had what I call moon dust. So I looked it up and started planting clover, because clover will quickly renitrogenate the soil, right? And it does.
Clover. Interesting. Okay.
But, I'm just talking off the top of my head. I want to give it back to you. But the idea is they don't want you to be self-sufficient. They don't want you to have money. They don't want you to grow your own. They don't want, and that portends, as you said, the master plan, and you said it much more sophisticated than I say it, but I say in order to really dig deep and understand what's going on, you must think like a criminal. Because if you don't think like a criminal, you're really not on the correct track. Because
you got to red team it.
How they do it. And you outlined that at the beginning of our conversation extremely well. I'll let you wrap it up, and then we need to know, outside of Substack, if there's any place else that we can find your work and follow what you're doing. And I will get back to you next time. I think I'll give you a bit of an outline, because you've covered pretty much everything I wanted, and it can be in any sequence. It's just, I think we might help us focus a little bit better. Not that you weren't, but just, it's like me talking about silver. I mean, how many hours do you have? I can just keep going.
Right.
But I think you did cover all the high points I made notes on. And I'll just give it back to you, wrap it up, and let us find out where we can follow your work, Michael. Thank you.
Right. Okay. I'll be succinct. First of all, everybody watching this, all of our families have been through pandemic, famines, and wars. There is no exception to that. If you're breathing air, your family has been through a lot. And that's just, we are survivors. We come from that. Everybody watching this. And it's our turn. That's it. And so it's time to step up and be a leader, right? And take responsibility for ourselves, which means, pulling our own leaders of ourselves and of our families, and pulling our neighbors together and that sort of thing. It's very important. Another thing is, if there's one little hint that I think is very strong, is the best advisor you're ever going to have is your own intuition. And when the people are trying to override our intuition, they're trying to brainwash us, right? So you like push those people back. So if you nurture your own intuition through lots of study, good sleep, no intoxicants, period, nothing, be clean, right? And get good sleep, good walks in the sunshine, that sort of thing, and listen to your intuition and train your intuition, because you can always make it better. So your intuition is like a muscle. You can make it better and better and better by study and, grading it, like, oh, I got that one wrong. Got it wrong again. Before you know it, you start, it's like playing tennis. You start getting better at it. So the ability to make quick, accurate, intuitive decisions is one of the most important things that you can possibly have at a time like this, because you have to be able to make, we don't have time to gather all the information. We don't have time to do a math problem and figure out what's going on. We have to bring it in as much as we can and go, in my judgment, this is what's likely to happen, so I'm going that way, right? And so that's it. And just train that intuition and train it hard.
Excellent. So what's your Substack channel?
Oh, Michael Yon is my name, Y-O-N, Yankee Oscar November, and Big Honey. So if you look up Big Honey, it'll pop up. People remember Big Honey. That was my call sign on the radio down on the border.
Oh, okay, good. Besides your Substack, where else do you think we should look for succinct, good information on the food situation? I know I'm biased. I've known David Dubine for a long time, Adapt 2030. Are there any others that you'd recommend?
Dubine is very good. And Mike Adams is always talking about he's always talking about stuff that, like one time years ago, before I knew Mike Adams at all, I'm like, oh, so you can use your diesel tractor as a generator. So he's like, of course, everybody knows that. Well, add one to the group, because I didn't know it until I saw you talking about it. So, I mean, there's little things like that where, there's there's a lot of old knowledge that, let me show you something. Oh, I took it downstairs. My Kinjiro statues. I have two statues here here's one. Misako and I are going to make a learning center called Kinjiro House. And in Japan, this guy's called Kinjiro. His statue has been in all of the Japanese schools, although they're taking him out now. So this guy in the 1800s, Nenomiya Sontoku, they call him Kinjiro, right? He's reading a book, as you can see, and he was a farmer. But when there was a famine coming in the 1800s, he saw it coming, right? And how did he see it coming? He saw it come because there's always some people that see it coming. I've noticed that when I'm studying famines. There's always the Cassandras out there, you know what I mean? Right. That are like, I see it coming, and this guy, Kinjiro, he saw it coming. And one of the ways he said that he saw it coming was the eggplants in the summer, I think he said, tasted like the eggplants normally taste in the fall. And it was just stuff like that, because he was pretty dialed into the cycles, right? And so he started warning everybody, like, plant millet, don't plant rice. And he was telling people how to, build fish ponds and all kinds of stuff, put garlic around the fish ponds, that sort of thing. And so we have two of his statues here. So Kinjiro is his name. But this guy, everybody who followed his advice lived, right? And so, but there was a huge amount of people died in that famine. And so after that was, people started hiring him all over Japan, and he would walk all over the place. That's why he's walking in the statue. He would just read books all the time, because he wasn't really well educated. He was one of those autodidacts who just studies, he just studies.
Well, I could keep going. I have to ask one more. I was told by a good friend in my field years ago that it's only in the East where you see statues to scholars. Everywhere else is to, athletes or military men or presidents, but only in the East you see that type of a statue that someone's honored for being a scholar. Is that true? Can you verify?
I don't know, because I actually just yesterday I was talking with Al Johnson, who is a research partner of mine, and we were talking about Thomas Jefferson and Benjamin Franklin and Thomas Jefferson. In fact, just today I was ordering one of those Thomas Jefferson book stands, the Monticello book stand, because I have these three giant tables for spreading my maps and books out, and I'm like, I bought these Quran holders actually, and they're not they don't work right. So, but Thomas Jefferson was known to study so much. There's a lot of statues of him, but he was like a study for 15 hours a day was what he was known for. But there was one statue in Los Angeles of a former he was a Japanese ambassador to Lithuania, and he saved a lot of Jews. Actually, he helped them get out from the Nazis, right? And there's a statue of him next to like a Starbucks or something. It was a coffee shop over in Japantown of Los Angeles, and all he's doing, he's just sitting on a bench reading a book.
Okay,
I think
cool.
people that are
Okay,
there,
David.
they go by it. And I'm just like, they'll have no idea who that guy was. And actually, when he died in Japan, a bunch of Jews showed up to his funeral, and people are like, "Well, you're welcome to Japan, but why are you here?" You know what I mean? You're like randomly, a bunch of Jews show up from Israel and places like that to his funeral, and they're like, "You don't know who he is?" And they're like, "He said." So they made him an honorary citizen of Israel, actually, and I think his children as well, and because he had saved so many Jews, but he never told anybody. He just became like a light bulb salesman later after all that, because he got in trouble with the Japanese government because he did a lot of things that broke rules, and so he ended up being a prisoner in Russia. And anyway, so he ends up back in Japan being a door-to-door salesman, selling light bulbs and doing stuff like that. And then he finally dies. A bunch of Jews show up from Israel and like, he's a superhero. And now it's just a little statue of him sitting on a bench reading a book. That's the way Japanese are, man. They're like English like that. One thing I really like a lot about English and Japanese is they, and I'm more Scots-Irish background, so I'm more boisterous, you know what I mean? But the English and the Japanese are always understated. I'm more like, hey, we can do it. Let's go.
It takes all kinds. Well, It's been a true pleasure. We will reconvene, and just thank you again. It was really, really fun.
Thanks for having me on.